what is the United States of America? What's the fascination with free labor and slavery? Like, why?
It makes money. You can make money if you are a racist.
You
It's
can
a
make money so
money-making
many
proposition.
ways.
Well, you
So,
make money in big pharma makes a whole bunch of money. They can charge you an immense amount for any pharmaceutical product that you can get in far cheaper in Mexico or Canada. You can sell cheap, awfully horribly built homes to people in Black communities and force them to live in ridiculous situation and charge them a ridiculous price for that and pay them too little for them to make their payments. And if they make their payments, they may be able to afford food and clothing and housing for their families, but there's no guarantee. So they go into debt. So then eventually you can pick that house up and sell it to a person who is a middle-class person for whom you will help, and you will help them to build a better home. But you can make money off people until they get smart enough to say no, or until they make enough money to put a stop to it. But we'll see to it that they don't get to that point if we possibly can. We like the idea that we can pay them less because, after all, we brought them over here from Africa. They should be glad. They should be glad they're living here instead of in Africa. No, that isn't what I should be glad about. Absolutely not. I remember, and I read a lot, and I read that Abraham Lincoln at one time said, those people are on their own back in Africa. Well, I also found out in the last few years that Abraham Lincoln was a Melungeon. He was part Black, part white, and part Cherokee Indian. Now you think of a picture of Abraham Lincoln. You see the length of his arms. You see the length of his legs. You see his face. You see the color and texture of his hair. Then you tell me that he is British or Scottish or Irish or German. Doesn't work. It doesn't work. He was born in Kentucky, in an area in Kentucky where there were a lot of people who were a mixture of those three color groups or those three nationalities, whatever you want to call them. They weren't different races. They just were different groups of people. And he was a Melungeon, as I understand it. Now, I read that and I believe it. And I looked back at him and I looked at what he said and what he had done. And I think, oh my God, why didn't somebody tell me this a long time ago? So now when people say, I say to groups, who was our first Black president? And they all say Barack Obama. And I say, actually, no. Abraham Lincoln was our first Black president. And it ruins the meeting. They absolutely refuse to give credence to such a thing. Black folks delighted. He's one of ours. He was. And when he was a child in Kentucky, they called him the N-word because that was a commonly used word at that time. Now, there's somebody out there right now saying, that's not true. It's not true. Well, if they dig him up, you'd find out that it is true. But we don't want to know the truth about that. And we don't want to know that Dwight Eisenhower had a Black forefather. And we don't want to know that every one of us had a Black ancestor. Every human on the face of the earth came from the same modern human beings who were Black.
Now, in your opinion, let me ask you this. Is there a more responsible way to deal with racism or to carry out civil disobedience?
Well, yeah, there is. It's perfectly simple because I think simply tell the truth. Simply tell the truth. Tell the truth about the fact that those first modern human beings were able to populate every landmass on the face of the earth without any modern technology. And then tell me that Black people aren't as smart as white people. Try that on. It's time for people to know the truth. If we'd simply tell the damn truth, that would solve our problems. But if I tell the truth, when I told the truth in my classroom, the reason I didn't lose my job is, number one, I was white, I was female, and I could teach that chair to read if it had a mouth. They didn't want to lose me, even though I was slightly crazy because I had talked about the fact that white people aren't white and they aren't any better than anybody else. And they were willing to put up with that as long as I taught every child to read.
Now, you spoke about telling the truth, and for decades now, you have been somewhat of the OG of disruptors within this oppressive system of ours. What gave you the courage? What motivated you or led you into like having the gall to actually step up and do, as you said earlier, the right thing?
Martin Luther King Jr. was dead, assassinated because he and Malcolm X were getting together. And if they had gotten together, those two men and their followers would have changed the situation in this country. So they had to die, and they were both assassinated. And I knew that what we did was absolutely, totally, and entirely wrong. It was unhealthy, it was inhuman, and it was not what the things possible, the wonderful things we said about this country, what we believed in, it was in opposition to every one of those things. And I couldn't go into my class in the morning after he was killed and just say, well, he's dead. My kids said, hey, they shot that king last night. Why'd they shoot that king, Mr. Elliott? I said, we're going to talk about that. So we did the things you have to do first thing in the morning. First we said the Pledge of Allegiance, the flag with the word under God in it, for God's sake. When I was a kid, under God wasn't in the pledge because we believed in the separation of church and state. But during Dwight Eisenhower's reign, the Knights of Columbus lobbied him to get the words under God inserted into the pledge, thereby make it into a little prayer that every child has to stand up in the morning and say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag with the words under God, and they do not belong there, and they need to come out. Then we sang God Bless America, which is a prayer, but it's got a lot of rhythm, and kids are happy to sing God Bless America. And if you don't believe it's fun, then listen to Kate Smith singing it. It is nothing but fun. We did that, and then we started to talk about the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. And I decided the night before that if my kids didn't understand what we were talking about when we talked about this death, that not only was I going to teach them the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "Oh, great spirit, keep me from ever judging a man and walked a mile in his moccasins," I was not only going to teach them that prayer, I was going to arrange to have it answered for them, because I had decided that I was going to do what Hitler did. I was going to separate my group on the basis of the color of their eyes. One of the ways you got thrown into the gas chamber during what's come to be called the Holocaust was having brown eyes. If you had brown eyes but a good German name, they threw you into the gas chamber because they thought you might be a Jewish person who was trying to pass. And so I didn't invent this exercise. I copied it from Adolf Hitler. So the next morning, then after these kids said, okay, I said, you kids have any idea how it would feel to be black in this country? No. I said, would you like to know? It was like, yeah, we've already gotten on spelling and handwriting. Keep this fool talking all day and we won't have to learn anything all day long. You know you did it. You did it in social studies class because the teacher was a coach. And all you had to do was have last night's football game and you could spend the whole period talking about football. So that day they thought we were just going to spend the whole day talking about race. And I said, okay, let's try this. We're going to judge people by the color of their eyes. And since I'm blue-eyed and most of the kids are blue-eyed, brown-eyed kids are going to be on the top the first day. And they said, what do you mean? I said, I mean that blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They're as clean as brown-eyed people. They're as civilized as brown-eyed people. And then little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row looked up at me. She said, you're that teacher here if you got them blue eyes. And I thought, so this is what it is. This is how it feels. That kid now has power over me because of the color of her eyes. She has more melanin in her eyes than I have in mine, so that makes her smarter and brighter and a better person. Holy sweet Jesus, what have we done? And at that point, one of the boys in the back stood up and said, well, if he didn't have them blue eyes, she'd be the principal, the superintendent. They're both brown-eyed. And I thought, oh, good Lord, look at how this kid knows how to be a racist. I never taught him how to be a racist, but in this country, we learn how to be a racist pre-birth and after death. So the day was absolutely terrible. I put brown-eyed people in the front of the room, made blue-eyed people go to the back because, you know, blue-eyed people spread germs. They're probably the ones who are spreading this virus. It probably came from blue-eyed people. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?
It does.
We've done that kind of thing during the second.
That's kind of the type of thing you gotta hear. You gotta hear yourself say it in order for you to really grab a hold of the preposterous nature of it. And I think that's the beauty of your exercise.